Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. This morning, the Prime Minister carried out a reshuffle of his government. Whilst there's only one promotion, Prakash Javadekar, who gets cabinet status, there are 19 new ministers of state. At the same time, 5 others have been dropped. Whilst the big 4, it's said, are not affected, but we don't know that for sure as yet, it could be that other portfolios may be changed when the announcement happens. And that announcement is expected any time. So tonight we ask, what is the message behind the reshuffle? Will it sharpen the government's efficiency and performance, or is it determined by electoral concerns? Has it strengthened Amit Shah and weakened Arun Jaitley? And finally, should the Prime Minister have been more ruthless rather than simply move pieces on an existing chessboard? My guests are Congress spokesperson and MP Abhishek Singhvi, JDU spokesperson and former MP Pavan Verma, the well-known BJP leader Sudhanshu Mittal, and 2 senior journalists, Nalini Singh in studio in Delhi and Siddharth Bhatia, who joins us from Bombay. Mr. Mittal, Mr. Modi came to power promising minimum government, maximum governance. But today, he has 78 ministers, which is precisely the same size as Dr. Manmohan Singh's government in May 2009. So what's happened to minimum government? Has the Prime Minister forgotten, or has he conveniently changed his mind?
Karanjit, you realize that the government is not just ministers. Government is 1 crore plus employees of the central government. The metaphor minimum governance, government, maximum governance relates to the role of government, which is minimize the role of government in the lives of a common man, and whatever the role, it should deliver the best governance. So this is the spirit. Don't compare that with this. I don't think that's the right thing. But what is critical is the expansion carried out is very well-rounded expansion. If you look at the profile of
can I stop you there, sir? I'll come to all the other elements of the expansion. I'll come to all the other elements of the expansion in a moment's time. But because this question of minimum government, maximum governance has attracted attention, I want to put your answer to Nalini Singh to see whether she's convinced. Are you convinced of the answer you heard, that actually minimum government is not just a matter of size, it's to do with reducing the role of government and its influence in your lives?
So can I turn in the answer, can I ask you a question also to Mr. Mittal? If you say to universities what anniversaries you are to celebrate, and the central government, the HRD ministry, say, is that minimum government? If you say who to invite, if you are actually appointing to the National Institute of Fashion Technology, the chairperson, etc., is that minimum government? So I would say that whereas Mr. Mittal might be correct in saying that there is a concept which we are missing, for me it is actually reorientation, fundamental reorientation of the role of government, which I think with great humility I must say that I don't think that's been understood. At least I don't see this in this reshuffle.
Pavan Verma, let me bring you in and get an opposition viewpoint before I go back to Mr. Mittal on that. That catchy slogan of the Prime Minister's, maximum governance, minimum government, had won a lot of applause and praise. And people thought that his first government, which was just 64 ministers, actually lived up to the belief that we were getting minimum government. Now, you've just heard Mr. Mittal reinterpret what minimum government means. He says it's not a matter of size, it's a matter of reducing the role and function and importance of government in the lives of individuals. And I have to put it to you that that's a very credible reinterpretation. But the question is, A, does it work for you? And more importantly, do you believe the role of government has been reduced over the last 2 years? Or is Mr. Mittal raising a promise only to make it look as if it's unfulfilled?
A short answer to you, Karan. I think this reshuffle is an indication of maximum politics, minimum governance. The entire reshuffle is governed by the imperative, especially in the short term, of political dividends that may come in the assembly elections that are due in the next few months and a year. As far as governance goes, as you know, this government, I would give it 100 out of 100 in coining catchy slogans. But in terms of implementation, I would give it very poor marks. In fact, whether it's on the index of ease of doing business or consciously reducing the role of government in everyday lives, we've seen very little of it in terms of institutional reform. Whereas the entire canvas of politics has been opened up, and we have a jumbo cabinet today where there is a talent deficit, and Modi, the politician, has finessed Modi, the administrator.
Let me go back to you, Mr. Mittal, before I go to Mr. Singhvi. I'm prepared to accept your redefinition of that catchy slogan that minimum government is not a question of size and numbers, but a question of reducing the role and importance of government in the lives of individuals. It's a very Thatcherite interpretation, but it's acceptable to me. The problem is, where in the last 2 years have you actually reduced the role of government? Give me 2 or 3 examples.
First, let's go to the Environment Ministry. This was the biggest bottleneck in development of industry or any development in this country. Everything has been decentralized. The reliance of having clearances from the central government, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which was known for its ex-minister's tax, is no more. It's passé, it's history. And rightly so, Prakash Javadekar has been rewarded.
Okay, number 2, what's the second?
He has
Give me a second instance.
An automated system where you don't have to sit in the darbars here. Number two. There have been major economic reforms in Commerce Ministry. Whatever little license rajas existed, they have again been decentralized at the lowest levels of the officers to take decisions themselves and not to have ministerial control over all these clearances. Second, I mean, I can list out so many.
Just give me one more.
I mean,
just give me one more.
Permissions which were required and where files.
Give me a third one, and then I'll go to someone else.
This is a third. Then fourth, Ministry of Industry. Third, MSME. Fourth, Minister of Industries. So the entire plethora of these, permissions from the minister have been reduced.
Okay.
And, we are debating the cabinet expansion today. I'm willing to take this on any day with anybody, whether we have reduced the role of government or not.
It's a good point you're making. Let me go to Abhishek Singhvi. Mr. Singhvi, you've heard 3 examples or illustrations of how, in fact, that phrase minimum government should be interpreted. And therefore, the argument is the fact that Mr. Modi's ended up with a government the same size as Mr. Manmohan Singh had in 2009 doesn't mean that this Prime Minister has gone back on that catchy phrase of minimum government. And the 3 examples are: A, the role of government in environmental clearance is reduced and reduced sharply, for which Javadekar has been promoted. Secondly, the role of economic reforms has removed the role of discretion in commerce and commerce ministry transactions. And similarly, in the case of industry, where presumably, although Mr. Mittal didn't say it, FDI now happens more by the automatic route than the discretion route, and that means once again the role of government is reduced. Very quickly, do you accept that despite my claim that in terms of numbers the government has gone up, Mr. Mittal's given a good case for arguing that in terms of clearances and procedures, government has minimized?
Karan, I think we are mixing up 2 completely unrelated issues. And I also think that you have to await a much more comprehensive study to understand whether the ease of doing business or the sequence of permissions or the labyrinth ladders of government have become less. There is no such evidence. We have moved up marginally in the ease of doing business in one index. In several others we've gone down. To give an individual example of a Ministry of Environment clearing a lot of permissions, I can give you a counter example that half the country's NGOs and half the country's environmentalists are up in arms saying that the Environment Ministry has confused itself to have become the Corporate Affairs or Clearance of Corporate Affairs Project Ministry. There is a job, a focus and object of the Environment Ministry, and there is a lot of problem there where people believe that indiscriminately permissions are being given. So merely, if I clear Karan Thapa's project quickly, it doesn't make me ease of doing business. Secondly, I entirely agree that the number of ministers may have no direct nexus to the ease of doing business or to the less interference of government in governance. So it's not made in the numbers, but the point I'm saying is mixed up is because this reshuffle has nothing to do with ease of doing business. This is purely for UP elections, declining graphs in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, and possible decline in Gujarat.
Let me then stop you there.
It's obvious. I mean, the two don't connect.
Let me stop you there. I want to move beyond that question of whether Mr. Modi has lived up to or contradicted his catchy phrase of minimum government, maximum governance. I want to come to all the other aspects of this reshuffle that happened today. Siddha Bhatia, the last time Mr. Modi brought in new ministers, the intake included people like Manohar Parrikar and Suresh Prabhu, and they were universally regarded as people who would add to the efficiency and performance of the government. This time round, we have 19 new faces, but I can't think of a single one, with perhaps the possible exception of MJ Akbar and another gentleman who's a surgeon, but that even is questionable, whether they actually fit the category of people who will add to efficiency and performance. Has politics, rather than quality of character and quality of credibility, determined who gets taken in?
So I think you've been saying reshuffle. I think we should stick to the word expansion. What has happened so far is we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But what has happened so far is 19 faces, none of them with any kind of stellar reputation or record in management of a ministry. You had the last time, as you mentioned, Mr. Parrikar. Mr. Parrikar had been a chief minister. Mr. Prabhu had an excellent reputation from Mr. Vajpayee's cabinet. So here are two heavyweights who were brought in soon after the government was formed. So none of these 19 give any kind of confidence yet. Let's not be unfair, but so far they give no confidence. Second, many of them belong to the Dalit and OBC caste. Now clearly, if that's not politics, what is? So this government, one gets the impression that this government, not the party, but this government is in perpetual election mode. So it's got something that it has done to keep an eye on UP first, and the other three states.
Okay.
Mr. Athavale, for example, who has some kind of ministerial experience, is definitely there to attract the Dalit vote. There is no question, because the Republican Party has some kind of base.
Okay. Let me
Thirdly, I think it's very, very important that I noticed that Mr. Mittal kept on saying, may I just finish this?
Go ahead.
Mr. Mittal kept on saying ease of doing business. How is governance related only to ease of doing
but
business?
let's not go back to that point. We've discussed it, Siddharth. Let's move on. We've discussed that point. Let's not go back to that point. I want to move on, other than get stuck there. There is another way, I suppose, of looking at this cabinet expansion. Although, by the way, I am going to use the word reshuffle, not expansion, because 5 ministers have been dropped. And it's possible that portfolios could be changed when we find out about portfolios. Another way of looking at this reshuffle is not just in terms of the intake, in terms of caste, or the failure to bring in people qualified by talent and experience. You can look at it also in terms of increased representation for a couple of states. UP, Gujarat, Rajasthan in particular, but also Karnataka and Uttarakhand at a lower level. And 4 of those states are states where there will be election either next year or in one case the year after. Doesn't that lead to the conclusion that once again the determining factor is electoral concerns?
Well, it leads to the conclusion that BJP has not learned. They had 7 ministers from Bihar, and what was the result in Bihar? 53. They had come plummeting down from a huge total in the in the previous government, 92 or something, came to half. So I would say that that lesson has not been learned. What I would notice, just going back to this thing that 19 people are not extremely well known, I think, Karan, the interesting thing is that regional satraps have not been inducted. I do not see any of these with a hugely important regional base. So what's happening is that the Prime Minister, who is already dwarfing the central ministers over here, will further dwarf the cabinet. I mean, the 19 included.
What you're
the
saying is a giant has deliberately chosen pygmies.
No, I would not say that. I would say this has happened, that the average height now of the minister is lower now with the 19. Just one last thing is, it's going towards the presidential form of government. Do remember, and although one should not be called citing Pandit Nehru had Sardar Patel as as the Home Minister, somebody who could combat spat with him. I think Atalji also had Advani, who was supposedly...
Rajnath doesn't fit that list?
So, no, I would say, so who actually can look him eye to eye?
Let me bring you in at that point again, Mr. Mittal. What you're hearing is that, in fact, two types of politics determine the expansion of this group of ministers. Firstly, state-based concerns reflective of the fact that elections are coming up, and then secondly, caste concerns. You have, after all, 7 SC/ST new ministers, 2 from the minorities, 2 from women, and 1 at least an OBC. So it's either caste concerns or straightforward state-based election concerns. Talent is not the reason why people have been incorporated. Experience is not the reason why they've been incorporated.
Can I beg to differ with what observations have been made about this till now? And you'll give me sufficient time to explain why I say this. First, the consideration of the elections which are coming. Out of the 19, there are only 4. 3 from Uttar Pradesh, 1 from Uttaranchal, who have elections in next 1 year. Only 4 out of 19.
Gujarat also has elections in December 2017.
Secondly,
and 3 intakes from Gujarat.
Lack of experience. Sir, that is 1.5 years. Sir, 1.5 years.
It's still next year.
Sir,
it's still next year.
1.5 years.
It's still
and that
next
also
year.
only makes it 7, even if you consider. Sir, even if you consider that it is only 7 out of 19. So if it is 7 out of 19, can that be the reason? No. Secondly, you are all saying there is no experience and there is no talent. Now let me read out some of the names which are not only experienced but enormously talented and also regionally important. Are you going to say that SS Ahluwalia, who has been in parliament for more than 25 years, headed JPCs and headed innumerable committees, is not talented? Ramesh Chandappa from Karnataka, who was the Home Minister, who has been a 4-time MP, 2-time MLA, he is not experienced or not talented. Vijay Goyal has been a part of the Prime Minister's office, a regional Satra, Delhi he holds today. 3 times Lok Sabha, 1 time Rajya Sabha, Minister for 5 years, and yet he does not have experience. He is not heavyweight enough. Rajan Gohain, a towering personality of Assam, a Homia, a 4-time Lok Sabha member. He is not. Mr. Arjun
I think you made your point, Mr. Mittal. Mr. Mittal, we don't have to go through the biography of every new person. You've made your point. Let me get in Pavan Verma and see whether he's convinced.
I don't think he needs an introduction.
Well, let's see whether Pavan Verma is convinced. You've heard Mr. Mittal actually read out the biographies of several new people who've been brought in and argue that they have talent, they have experience. SS Ahluwalia, the gentleman from Karnataka who was Home Minister. These are people who he says visibly have talent, they have experience. Yes, it's wrong to say they've been brought in just for political reasons. Are you convinced?
No, I'm not convinced, and I'll tell you why. There's a basic reason for it, and that applies also to your earlier question about minimum government. You see, rarely have governments seen such a disproportionate concentration of power in the Prime Minister's office. There are today, from what I hear, and I could be wrong, but thousands of files pending in the Prime Minister's office because almost no decision can be taken on a delegated basis or without micromanagement and clearance by the Prime Minister's office. It is in fact a one-man government. That in itself as a philosophy devalues the role of talent. The second point is, if you want to look at talent and expertise, look at what the government was before this cabinet reshuffle. You have senior cabinet ministers who have been marginalized so verifiably. And I don't want to embarrass them by taking their name, but look at the Ministry of External Affairs. The minister is not in the loop on almost any major decision making from what we hear. And she is one of the most competent ministers with the most diversified experience you can imagine. The Home Minister himself. Thirdly, where there was talent, it has not been promoted. We had Piyush Goyal, we had Dharmendra Pradhan, we had Jayant Sinha. People like these have not been promoted, but non-performers have been kept where they are. I don't see what Radha Mohan Singh is doing in the cabinet. I think, frankly, I don't know what role Smriti Irani
Karanji,
has
this is
given
unfair.
her legacy and the
Karanji,
acrimony
this is
she has
unfair.
created.
This is
or
absolutely
what
unfair.
Anand Gowda
Mr.
is
Mittal,
doing.
I'll come
And then
to you.
all those-
I'll come to you,
all
but
those-
let him express his opinion. Have you finished, Pavan? Go ahead.
And all those who have embarrassed the government and have also been non-performers, like for instance V.K. Singh, Mahesh Sharma, Sanjeev Balian, Sadhvi Niranjan Jyoti, what is their contribution?
All right.
So let us not take it on a mechanical reading of expertise and administrative or otherwise.
You know,
what is the role of ministers in this government when the Prime Minister deals directly with bureaucrats?
Okay, you've made your point.
Overarching ministers.
Let
It's
me-
a concentration of power which is unprecedented.
You know, the point that's being made, Mr.
Karanji, I must
Singhvi,
respond to it.
I'll get you to respond, Mr. Mittal, but let me
Karanji,
bring
I
some...
will
Mr.
respond to it or
Mittal,
I'm leaving.
I'll get you to respond, but let me bring
No,
others
no.
in. This mustn't become...
No, you can't do this. You can't have a 5:1 and then say
I don't
all
have
the
5:1,
charges will be there and I
Mr.
will not
Mittal.
respond. This is
Mr.
not all.
Mittal, Siddharth
This is not
Bhatia
all.
and Nalini Singh
Let's
are
maintain a balance.
independent journalists. I'll come back to you. Anyway, I'm giving you more chance than the others. I'll come back to you.
No,
But
sir, they may be independent, but I am being attacked. I am being attacked and I have a right because what I just heard is not only obnoxious, it is nauseating.
All right.
Let Mr. Pavan Verma become the Prime Minister of this country and then pass these value judgments.
I
can't let them go.
let him
I
reply
can't
after me.
get
Let him
past all
reply
these.
together.
You can't have this kind of a debate on this
Let him-
television.
Go ahead,
go
Mr.
together.
This is not
Mittal.
on.
Make your point. Go ahead.
Emphatic use of
Go ahead, no,
adjectives.
Pavan Verma. Let Mr. Mittal speak. Go ahead, Mr. Mittal. Make your point.
Mr. Pavan Verma's observation, Mr. Pavan Verma's observations sadden me that as somebody who should know what are the limits of observation in terms of what is the competence of ministers, I think he's crossed all limits. Mr. Pavan Verma, the day you become the Prime Minister of this country, kindly make these observations, otherwise you have no right and no business. Sushma Swaraj, whether she's been marginalized or not, you are not the spokesman and you do not know the facts. So please do not speak lies and do not speak
But I know the
falsehood
facts.
on television. As far as who should be promoted or who should not be promoted, I think it's the prerogative of the Prime Minister and not Mr. Pavan Verma.
But
because
forgive
neither
me,
you have
Mr.
the competence nor
Mittal,
the
it is
mandate.
also the
But you can
prerogative
comment
of
on
the
his
press to
decision.
question how the
Lastly,
Prime
he has
Minister
not done his
exercises
decision.
his prerogative. The Prime Minister has the right to choose his ministers, but the press
Sir,
has the right to
sir,
comment,
sir,
to
that means
criticize,
there is nothing
or to
available for
analyze.
public
He
debate.
is not the judge.
All
He is not the judge of the competence of a minister for being promoted or not promoted.
Karan,
And if
but
you
I have
think
the
he
right
is
to
the
comment.
competent man for
Karan.
that, make him the Prime Minister.
All right, gentlemen, I need to bring in
Karan.
my other guest. Let me come to you. Mr. Singhvi.
You have
Mr.
no
Singhvi.
right to say who should be promoted. That's it.
Mr. Mittal,
Prerogative
now
of the
in
government.
fairness, you must allow other guests to speak.
I do.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask Mr. Singhvi to speak. Come in, Mr. Singhvi. I want to put to you a different issue because I think this question about talent, lack of talent, minimizing or giving room to ministers has been adequately aired. I want to bring another commitment the Prime Minister, it was believed, had made when he first appointed ministers that no one who crossed the threshold of 75 would continue in government. Now, clearly, there are two ministers today in the government at cabinet rank who are over 75. Kalraj Mishra and Najma Heptullah, but they continue. This would have been an ideal opportunity to move them to Raj Bhavans or somewhere else and to keep the Prime Minister's alleged word that 75 was the cut-off age. What do you make, Mr. Singhvi, of the fact that he's gone back on that alleged commitment?
I hope you'll give me a couple of minutes, Karan. I think I've got the least time, and merely because people are generally critical of the BJP doesn't mean that the BJP representative gets extra time. First of all, I think the policy as far as your question is concerned is show me the face and I'll show you the rule. When the object is to marginalize the Advanis, the Murli Manohar Joshis and the Yashwant Sinhas, a age rule is shown. When the object is to benefit somebody, in the case of one particular person because she's crossed over from the Congress, has been a bit of a vocal critic, then the age rule doesn't apply. So clearly there is no consistency, no reason has been given. Reports are set out, leaked, saying they'll be dropped, but nothing is happening. So I think there is complete inconsistency. The rule is not sacrosanct. But I want to make the more important point, which has already been made, because I didn't think I get enough time, that this was a time to demonstrate droppings. The droppings are as important. Each of the 5 names taken, which I wanted very much to take, the Sanjeev Balians, the V.K. Singhs, the Sadhvi Jyoti and other names, Mahesh Sharma, there is a complicit silence by the Prime Minister till now, and today there is an endorsement by not changing them at all. After all, every time a preaching lecture is given to us in some third party speech abroad that, oh, we stand for secularism, inclusion, but no concrete action ever taken, no droppings now, and no changes in all probability. Okay. So I think this is a very strong message of endorsement. And lastly, I think, Pawan, this Prime Minister has perfected the art. One part is, the entire cabinet is largely superfluous. He is directly dealing with the bureaucrats. Today, if I am a minister of X, I come to know of a decision after the file has been reviewed by my junior joint secretary in my ministry, who is called directly by the PMO. That's the style of functioning which was perfected in Gujarat and is now sought to be applied here. It is actually something anathema to our very system.
Mr. Singhvi, you made a good point. Before I take a break, I want to bring in Siddharth Bhatia from Bay and put another aspect of it to you, Siddharth. Other than Prakash Javadekar, there isn't a single other promotion in the cabinet or the ministers of state. What does that tell you of the quality of the ministers that the Prime Minister didn't at the end of 25 months think it proper to promote anyone else? And the second thing is that other than the 6 or 5 that he's dropped, there are many who embarrassed the government. Their names have been read out earlier on. Sadhvi Niranjan Jyoti, Giriraj Singh, Sanjeev Balyan, General VK Singh, all of them continue. So is it not strange, A, that no one other than Javadekar was thought worthy of a promotion, and other than the 5 who are dropped, serious embarrassments still continue despite the fact that they often regularly embarrass the government? What do you make of those two twin things?
So these are very good questions. As far as Prakash Javadekar is concerned, I would call it a case of the dog that didn't bark at night, because there are very competent ministers. Piyush Jha is clearly one of them, and they would have been promoted. But Prakash Javadekar's promotion is actually extremely significant, because he is the man who is in charge of the no development zones, forests, and this government's thrust has been on clearing land applications as far as possible. And he has been doing a good job, and I say a good job from the government's point of view, from industry's point of view. So in fact, this is a reward as far as Prakash Jha is concerned, to show that this government will continue on the path. Somebody mentioned the NGOs. It's not only the NGOs. Okay. A lot of people are saying...
But go beyond Prakash Javadekar, Siddharth. What about the fact no one else has been deemed worthy of a promotion? What does that tell us?
As far as the other concern, yeah, exactly. So clearly they are perhaps, I wouldn't say not worthy of promotion, but they have been, the message has been sent that, you remain at whatever place you are, because we don't want you to rise. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that they do not, the party, the government does not want them to grow too fast.
All right.
This is what I would think.
Let's take a break.
But I have no evidence for it.
Let's take a break at that point.
As far as the other names you're concerned, you kept on saying embarrass the government. Do we want to come back to this? Because
no, finish quickly, because I want to take a break.
The embarrassment of these 5 ministers. You might think that these people have embarrassed the government. Are you sure everyone else thinks that? So maybe they are doing what they are supposed to be doing.
That's a very good point. You have a telling point there. We may think it embarrasses the government, but the Prime Minister may think differently. Mr. Mittal, there are two impressions that have emerged from the way this exercise has happened. First, it seems that the new people who were taken in were vetted, perhaps even identified by Amit Shah, and he's emerged as not just the head of the party, but the second most powerful person after Mr. Modi. And the second impression, although no one has specific proof to back it up, but the second impression is that the importance and influence of Arun Jaitley has diminished. How do you respond to both of those?
Before I respond to this, because there's an analogy, I just heard Mr. Singhvi talking about the absolute concentration in the hands of the Prime Minister. It's a one-man government. Mr. Singhvi, you should be very happy if it's a one-man government, because then it is the least government. Maximum governance and least government, because according to you, rest are all irrelevant, only one man works. So that it should make you happy. And Prime Minister is then living up to his promise, na?
Now
what are you complaining
now
about?
Now come to my question.
The fact is,
come to my question,
Mr. Mittal. You have a government. Yeah, I'm coming to your point now. We have a party and we have a government. There is absolute interaction between the two to formulate how we should go forward. Normally, people accuse that, look, when the government is there, the party is neglected. Here is a case where the government and the party are in unison and both are doing things together to ensure that BJP goes on a victorious path. I think that's the message out of this, which we should be welcoming. As far as the third, this thing that someone's influence has been reduced, and you said there's no evidence. Once there's no evidence to that effect, why make a comment on it also?
All right, that's a fair way. That's a fair way of turning my question on its head. But let me bring in an independent person like Nalini Singh, who's sitting with me. Do you share the impression that Amit Shah has emerged from the way this exercise happened as the second most important person, and that the impression that Arun Jaitley's influence and power has diminished is perhaps correct?
Let me answer the first one. I believe that this exercise of who will be inducted, these 19 members, that this has been going on for about 2 months in Delhi between only two persons, the Prime Minister and Amit Shah, and many times they've had meetings which have lasted hours and hours. So I would say now, when you see what's really happening, even today you saw that the Prime Minister and Amit Shah were very comfortable with each other, as if, if you've been together for 30 or 40 years, this is how you look together. So I would say, yes, the answer to your question is that the most important person in government and in the party is Amit Shah.
What about Arun Jaitley?
I would not like to speculate. I think one can just see if the Information Broadcasting Ministry still stays with him. Does that mean that he had too much of a burden? Does that mean that he wasn't able to perform in the Finance Ministry as well as?
So you're waiting for the portfolios before you answer the question about Jaitley?
And I would say that there is an interesting thing. I think Mr. Singhvi should be told one small thing.
Well, not just about that. This is not about Mr. Singhvi, forgive me. This is about the expansion. But I will bring in Mr. Singhvi, because the point, Mr. Singhvi, that was made, that the Prime Minister has become almost dictatorial, I think those were the words you used, was rebutted on your behalf by Mr. Mittal. Are you being unfair in saying that a Prime Minister is dictatorial? Because after all, increasingly all over the world, Prime Ministers do tend to be. And given that the prerogative of who they keep and who they dismiss is theirs and theirs alone, it's an easy charge to make, but a difficult one to back up. Do you want to back that up? Mr. Singhvi, go ahead.
The real ruler and governor is that person who... The real ruler and governor, Karan, is that person who may have the prerogative to be dictatorial but is most democratic. It is clear to anybody who has seen the style of functioning of the central government and in fact the Gujarat government that Prime Minister Modi is a one-man show. And pardon me, but since when is a one-man show a new definition of maximum governance, a minimum government and maximum governance? Mr. Mittal seems to confuse a one-man dictatorial show with minimum government and maximum governance. What is happening is that from secretary of the ministry downwards to joint secretaries to directors to even lower than that, first and foremost the appointments are made directly by the Prime Minister. They are handpicked by groups by the Prime Minister and mostly from Gujarat. Secondly, files are called directly. Thirdly, decisions are reviewed directly. Fourthly, the minister in charge comes to know if he is lucky just before the announcement is made, sometimes even after the announcement is made. And let me tell you one thing, Karan, as I conclude, that there is clearly a sync completely between Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Modi. I agree with you 100%. And certainly the base of decision making and inputs earlier, when the original cabinet was made, was with one or two more people. And today it seems that only Mr. Shah and Mr. Modi are privy to this decision making. So that partly answers your question.
Siddharth Bhatia, there is another element of this reshuffle that we're beginning to discover this afternoon and evening as the reverberations from the Shiv Sena begin to dominate the news. The Shiv Sena is deeply unhappy. In fact, the Shiv Sena has said this is a BJP cabinet expansion, not an NDA expansion. They boycotted the ceremony. They are not involved in any number at all that's been added to this list. Is that a problem that the BJP is lining up for the future, both in Delhi and Maharashtra?
Well, the Shiv Sena and the BJP, as we have seen in the last year or so and a little more, have been at loggerheads. The sniping levels have been going up steadily. The tone and the pitch, as well as the content of some of the things that have been said, mostly from the Shiv Sena side, are really strong. The Shiv Sena is gearing for the municipal elections, which are crucial. Anything that unless the Shiv Sena was offered something dramatic, it would have been like this. So there was some word that Mr. Anil Desai would be made a minister, but you can't expect, after sniping at the Prime Minister himself for a year, to be given these kind of favors. Secondly, by bringing in somebody from Maharashtra, who happens to be from the Republican Party, you're not going to, you've already finished the Maharashtra quota. So I think the Shiv Sena being unhappy is more or less par for the course.
Okay.
What is important is how this will continue to grow in the coming months.
Absolutely, and that's a good question to lodge in the air for the audience to ponder over. I'm going to come back as we end this show to this critical question about the imprint of the Prime Minister on his government becoming sharper and more solid. I'll go first to Pavan Verma and I'll give the last word to Mr. Mittal. At the end of the day, when a Prime Minister's imprint on his government becomes stronger and more clear, that's usually considered a good thing, because that's the Prime Minister exercising his authority and ensuring that people who work with him and under him are loyal, and therefore they do what they're told. Why do we in India perceive that as an exercise of dictatorship? It would be considered in England, if Cameron did it, as proof of his control and his authority. We take it as dictatorship. Are we right to do that?
Karan, I feel that concentration of power and a Prime Minister leaving his imprint on the cabinet are two different things. If there is an imprint of a Prime Minister on the functioning of a cabinet and the Prime Minister has a vision and a viable and sustainable model to deliver it, so be it, and that should be the case in democracies. His primus inter pares. But if that imprint reduces itself to, as I said earlier, a disproportionate concentration of power, which in itself becomes an obstacle to governance, marginalizing ministers and creating bottlenecks in delivery systems, then you can question it. Secondly, if concentration of power also leads to the loyalty test in every matter, did you notice, Karan, where Amit Shah was sitting? You have been a veteran journalist. How many times has a party president sat in terms of protocol next to the Prime Minister?
All right.
There is something happening here which is unprecedented.
And
that is the reason also, I believe, that allies are being treated in this manner. Because there is the Amit Shah, Narendra Modi stamp, which is BJP centric, which is not about leaving an imprint, but about monopolizing power.
Let me then put that point to Mr. Mittal. Mr. Mittal, I asked a question about the Prime Minister's imprint being perceived as a dictatorship. You've got an answer that actually picked up particularly on the nature of the relationship and the growing power and influence of Amit Shah. And the point that Mr. Verma made to illustrate the growing power of Amit Shah was to say, unprecedentedly, he was sitting just beside the Prime Minister at the swearing in, something that party presidents have not done in the past. And certainly, I will add that in the days when Mr. Vajpayee would have swearing-ins, none of his party presidents sat beside him. That is unique and unprecedented. Do you want to respond to that?
Sonia Gandhi sat by Prime Minister.
First, two things: concentration of power and dictatorship and all this. If a Rahul Gandhi tearing of the agenda of the cabinet or the decision of the cabinet and the Prime Minister meekly accepting it is what is acceptable to Mr. Singhu and Mr. Verma as democratic or as glorious institutional illustration of the Prime Minister's authority, then I rather have a dictator than to have this kind of a lame duck Prime Minister. A man who has been chosen by this nation has been given a mandate and an authority and a job. And if he's doing that with all his might and all his competence, grudging it by the opponent itself is an indication of the righteousness of what he is doing.
Okay.
Because the opposition comes not on the merit of what is being done, but out of the frustration of the success of the Prime Minister.
All right,
that's
Mr.
one
Mittal,
side of the story.
I'm going to have to...
The second side of the story...
Wait, Mr. Mittal, you've only got 20 seconds now because I'm running over. I want you to have the last word, but keep it a short word, sir.
Of the elevation of Amit Shah is what you all talked about. I mean, here's a perfect example of harmony between the party and the government. Look, it's a party which is voted in power.
All right.
And the government represents what the party aspirations are.
All right, Mr. Mittal. So this what?
Critical about it. That shows how perverseness has crept into our minds. Being critical about everything and anything which is being done by any government.
That will have to be the last word, Mr. Mittal. I will have to end there. We're running over. I wanted you to have the last word because you felt, I have to add wrongly, that it was 5 against 1. You were forgetting that Siddharth Bharti and Nalini Singh are not party political. They're independent journalists. And obviously we have to have 2 opposition people there. So it wasn't 5 against 1. But nonetheless, I want you to have the last word because I don't want you to be aggrieved. My thanks to all my guests for joining me, and if you have been, thanks for watching. Keep watching this channel. Hopefully shortly, the portfolios will be announced.